Do you think Trump will say what he said he's going to say on the tweet? Will he bomb the bridges and the nuclear plants
I
today?
think he wants to.
This war, in as much as it's thousands of kilometers away, has a way of seeping into our pockets right here in Kenya, right here in Nairobi. You know, oil is our largest import.
Okay.
And so most guys have been thinking about it from, we can't import oil. But what about the exports that we had been exporting to the Gulf region?
It's very crazy to me that a single individual among billions can wage war on a whim.
The problem today is that the government in Washington, there are no adults in the room anymore.
That lady in Nyeri who is a tea farmer is going to start suffering because of a war that she did not start. She cannot stop, and she has no leverage over the players.
Is Israel threatened? Yes, they're threatened, but is it an existential threat?
Welcome to Just Money Podcast. Welcome to another season of the Just Money Podcast with me, Just Ivy Africa, and the Kenyan Wall Street, and Kofisi. Thank you so much, Kofisi, for always allowing me to come and steal this beautiful boardroom and have it act as my set. Today, a very interesting conversation because there's a war, guys. There's a war. And here's the thing. I'm 37 years old and I'm tired of living in unprecedented times. I want to live in precedented times. I think I've been through so much. But here's the thing with a war that a lot of people don't like to consider. It seems like it's very, very, very far away. But truly, is it? This war or these wars, illegal or not, we're going to have the guests explain this to us later, are going to directly affect your pocket. People are saying, research is saying, experts are saying that get ready for things to get more and more and more expensive. Now I want to understand why, and I want to understand exactly what will get expensive, and I want to know what this war means for me. What can I do tomorrow when I wake up tomorrow morning? What can I do next week, next month? Where should I be putting my money? Because the thing with wars, some people profit. Am I able to profit from the war without it really diminishing my values? So on set with me, we have two fantastic gentlemen. You know how we like to do things here, a very key, unique type of introduction, because I like to allow my guests to introduce themselves so that you can understand why it's important for you to hear them out. Let's start with Prince there. Prince, I'd like to ask my guests one question. Who are you? And why should I listen to what you have to say on the topic today when it comes to the Iran war, the US war, and how it affects Kenya?
Well, thanks, Ivy, for having me on the show. Who am I? I am an economist, but not your typical economist who tells you what will happen in the future. I ask people what will happen, and I aggregate those voices, and I try to make sense of it. So I'm the founder and chief economist of eConsult Africa, which is Africa's first economic aggregator, economic sentiment aggregator, where our philosophy is really that African voices need to be at the center stage of any economic conversation about Africa. And so rather than just having the top-down approach where we see reports from central banks or IMF or World Bank, I ask the people on the ground what they think will happen in their economy. And we analyze what they're saying. And it acts very closely to a prediction market. So if you're familiar with something like Polymarket in the US, it's what we're trying to build for Africa, but exclusively on matters economics. So that's who I am. Why should you listen to me about this Iran war? I believe that this war, in as much as it's thousands of kilometers away, has a way of seeping into our pockets right here in Kenya, right here in Nairobi, and many other African places. And if we take a step further to try and understand some of these dynamics, you know, from an econ point of view, then it puts us in a much better position to plan ahead as opposed to act surprised when the obvious happens.
And that's why we specially requested to have you here.
Thank
and
you.
We love what it is that you do. I do see your posts. I see LinkedIn. I like the aggregation.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you, because if what you do is sentiment,
Mm-hmm.
any angry person can come to your platform and just, trash talk. So how do you know what you're aggregating is?
Okay, so they can't trash talk directly. We have questions. Like, for example, one of the trending questions on our platform, it's econsult.africa, and the platform is called the Forecast Arena. We have a question there on, do you think that Kenya's fuel prices will reach 200 shillings by the end of April? yes, no. So what you do, you come and take a position, right? So the way you trash talk to me is by taking a position.
Okay.
And I kind of analyze how many people are saying yes, how many people are saying no.
Okay.
The last time I checked the numbers, it was about 69% or out of that position that it will happen. And we take that as the wisdom of the crowd. And we hope that once we see that this is what the crowd believes, that even policymakers can come to these platforms and, try to understand what is the collective intelligence of their people and try to align their policies around that. And also, as a person who takes a position on this platform, you can actually benefit from your intelligence if you take a position. So you can back up your position with a capital commitment. And if you end up being right, then there is a financial reward that you can get.
Interesting.
Yes.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. Platforms like Polymarket in the US have really taken this up. They were able to predict who's going to become the next US president. They were able to predict a few things that have come into, actual fruition. And we want that for African markets. We want African people, not just Kenyans, but all around the African continent, to also have a voice in deciding on these matters, because some people sit down and they think economics is something that, fancy people in offices should be discussing. But, we want to move away from that macro and come to a blend of micro. So I want to avoid using the word bottom up. But that sweet equilibrium spot in the middle where we look at what's happening with the big numbers, inflation, GDP, but also what the people on the ground are saying. Yes, that's where it's at.
Have you affected any policies as yet? Do you lobby for, because as of now, even with policies, we are told that we can have public participation, but they don't listen.
Well,
So
let's see,
are
guys,
people listening
go
to
on
you
the
really?
platform. Let us know what you think. Let's see how many votes
Yep.
are actually going.
Okay.
The Energy Petroleum Regulation Authority, EPRA, is going to be releasing their fuel numbers mid this month. So let's see what happens, and let's track this poll till the end of the month.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah.
Prince. Thanks so much for being here. Andrew, who are you, and why should I listen to what it is that you have to say? Like, qualify yourself as to why I should care.
Well, I'm Andrew Franklin. I'm a former Marine, spent 22 years active in Reserve Marine Corps. I have a varied background in the NGO sector from 1981 onwards to 1990, working in maternal child health, family planning, even at the same time as I was participating in Marine Corps activities. I sold offshore investments here. I'm very well aware of the business climate. Not just here, but also overseas, because I was selling investments to qualified individuals in dollars, pounds, and eventually euros, and using unit trust, mutual funds, and the like. I used to be interviewed by people like Carol O'Dara about the stock market, stock exchange, and for her Thursday column, and until the Capital Markets Authority found my opinions to be a bit matter of concern. I had been calling for a consolidated financial services authority in this country to fight not only terrorism but money laundering, which was never done. And so now we're gray listed, which has an effect on the pocket of everyone, and also security. We can't stop financing of terrorism. We don't. And now Kenya is a hub for transnational organized crime of various kinds, which affects security. Why should you listen to me? Because I know things. Because I know the people. I know what's been going on here for 45 years now. I used to do a political risk survey for Frost & Sullivan back from 85 to 93. And also, when you mentioned public participation, I have influenced things here, not through public participation, but by forcing my way into the Constitutional Implementation Commission proceedings to discuss and provide memos on comments on bills like the KDF bill, the NPS bill, the NSC bill. The security legislation that Charles Nachai, when he was the chairman of that commission, eventually we were very receptive to listening to informed, neutral, or not so much neutral, but non-political opinions. And I do think that some things that have been done here that I've managed to be when I was published,
Yeah.
about the KDF Amendment Bill in 2015, which I referred to as a national security threat. And that was then withdrawn. By the way, I know I can go on too much, but there was a move afoot to take NYS, National Youth Service, put them in a strategic auxiliary, which would be the reserve for KDF. NYS is not designed as a paramilitary organization, but that KDF bill in 2015 would have included them, so they could be mobilized and get sent to Somalia under KDF control.
Wow, interesting.
That was withdrawn and has never been reintroduced. So so I have to say things can be done here, although I would be less than honest if I said that I was happy with the progress, because I haven't seen that much progress.
Really? Oh my goodness. And you mentioned that you were Frost and Sullivan in 1983. Luckily, I wasn't born in 1983.
Well, a lot of people weren't.
And a lot of people listening to this podcast were not. So I guess
that's true. But Frost and Sullivan was one of the first companies to do political risk analyses of countries.
Okay.
And I read about them in a magazine, a U.S. magazine. I then contacted the magazine in 1984 and I was given the address and contacts, and I met the founders in New York City when I was on home leave, and then I became the senior or the reviewer initially for Sudan's country report.
Yeah.
And then I became the primary for Kenya as well.
That's cool. I must give a disclaimer. The opinions of the guests are not opinions of Kenyan Wall Street or just Ivy Africa. Andrew, maybe actually let's just go back to you, because I think how I want to start this conversation is understanding as simply as possible what's going on. So Iran is under threat. In fact, today, as we speak Tuesday, Donald Trump tweeted a very random, aggravating tweet. I think we're going to put it here, where he threatened Iran and said, if you don't open the Strait of Hormuz, there's going to be retaliation. So when I read news or information like this, the first thing I think is, what is this? And why does it matter? What is the Strait of Hormuz? Why are we discussing this in the first place?
Okay, this war of choice launched by President Trump against Iran, which was done almost at the drop of a hat, was apparently without much planning, ignored the fact that 20% of the world's oil is transiting through the Straits of Hormuz. And that regardless of all of the conferences on the environment and replacing fossil fuels with renewables, which is a good idea, which we talk about a lot here but don't do that much of, the world is not ready to have its oil cut off. The United States was embargoed in 1974, and then again we lost all of our oil when the Shah of Iran was overthrown, and we were sitting on queues at petrol stations, and the price of oil was going up all the time, not because of a war necessarily that we were in, but because of either that we were supporting Israel in 73, 74, so Saudi Arabia and the other OPEC members cut us off, the Arab countries, who are now our allies. And then, of course, when the Shah was overthrown in 1979 and then the Islamic Republic was established, we lost our access to the supplies from Iran. That had huge effects, but mainly on the United States. This war that was launched 5 weeks ago on Iran, coming after 47 years of hostility between the Islamic Republic and the United States, which may have been instigated by Israel, which has seen Iran as an existential threat for years. And then Iran has also said, we are an existential threat to Israel. But that doesn't mean that we should have launched a war of choice at this point in time. We had bombed Iran in any case late last year, notionally destroying all their nuclear facilities. The problem today is that the government in Washington, that is Trump, we don't know what's going on. And the people around him, there are no adults in the room anymore. It was not our job to get rid of the horrible regime in Tehran and Iran. Make no mistake about it, there was nothing good about that regime. They killed 50 or 60,000 people earlier this year when their Gen Zs went into the streets. This is not a nice bunch of people. But this was a war that was launched almost on a whim, on the basis that somebody believes that we can win wars by bombing.
It's very crazy to me that a single individual among billions, can wage war on a whim? Like,
Well, he
what does
controls.
that say about power?
What it says is that there's a lot of people around him with their own agenda that match, that they think they can use him, and he doesn't care. See, let's be honest. Iran was fighting Israel here at the coast in the late 1990s into the early 2000s. There was a sting operation conducted that picked up several Iranian agents at the Niali golf course. They were there to pick up 15 kilos of plastic explosive to use in Kenya. So that, and they were recently released from committee. They were in committee for about 10 or 12 years. So and there was a war going on at the coast between Israel, Israeli Secret Service, Mossad, and Iran over 30 or 40 Tanzanian flagged oil tankers that were breaking sanctions. They were carrying Iranian oil in violation of sanctions. And so all that information, and they were being facilitated through Kenya as well. So this hostility goes back a long way.
Yeah, clearly.
And let's face it, this also goes back to when our embassy was occupied in Tehran, when Jimmy Carter was president. So that but now we have a situation where a war was launched without any notion of what the consequences would be for the world.
I want to double down on that and move to Prince, because Andrew said the world is not ready to lose 20% of its oil supply. Where's the other 80%?
What is this Strait of Hormuz? It's this narrow stretch. It's like 33 kilometers at its narrowest point. That's like what CBD to JKIA.
Okay.
And about 20 million barrels of oil pass through every single day.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So think like a Kenyan. You know how many barrels we consume in Kenya in a day? It's about 116,000. So if you were to do the math, as an economist, I like the math, the amount of oil that passes through the Strait of Hormuz in one day can supply Kenya for 172 days, pretty much half a year.
Wow.
That's how significant it is,
Wow.
right? And with the current conflict going on, Iran has effectively closed this very important oil corridor. Yeah?
How do you close a corridor in the ocean?
You just say, when you go to the expressway, the thing,
Really?
and then you can't pass. Literally, almost like that.
Wow.
Well,
Okay.
in fact,
Yeah.
by rocketing, sending drones, and firing missiles at ships, at shipping,
Yeah.
it causes the insurance companies to cancel their insurance policies for these oil tankers.
Yeah.
It causes the crews we have to be paid more as a hazardous pay, and it just simply disrupts, the flow that everybody was expecting and anticipating.
Yeah.
And I think, Prince, you'll agree that the countries that are being most affected by the shutoff of oil from Iran, from the Persian Gulf, are in Southeast Asia. These are these growing economies, and when you look
Which
at
ones are these?
And then when you look
China.
at many, well, China has really developed a tremendous renewable energy
But
sector.
it's still the major export destination of the oil there.
And India,
In addition to India, Japan.
yes.
Kenya, if I could just interrupt a
Thanks.
little
Go
bit.
back, because we're in China, India,
Yeah.
and I'm still
Okay.
asking, why should
So
I
Kenya
care? Yeah.
has a G2G government to government contract to get our oil exclusively from the Gulf. Meaning every liter of fuel you see in the petrol station in Kenya originated from over there.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
All the oil in this country comes from over there. And as you know, Kenya, we don't have the domestic infrastructure to refine our own oil, right?
Anymore.
And also we don't have any separate arrangements as of now as to where oil is going to come from. So when that pathway closes, it means the clock starts ticking for us. And I saw Cabinet Secretary Mbadi say that we essentially have 16 days of fuel left. Maybe by now it should be 14 or something, because the oil that is coming in here is oil that had been shipped before the war started.
Exactly.
So whatever ship is coming is probably among the last, right? What we're going to see EPRA produce as the oil prices on the 14th of this month may be very different from what they publishes the oil prices next month. And if we look at our neighbors in Tanzania, at the beginning of this month, the regulator increased their oil prices from 2,800 Tanzanian shillings, that's about 140 Kenya shillings, to about 3,800, which is about 190. So a 33% increase. And they explicitly said this hike is because of the war going on. So as the Tanzanians say in Kiswahili, ukiona cha mwenzako chanyolewa, chako kitilie maji, which basically means, for our friend here, do you speak in Kiswahili?
Kidogo.
Okay, good. So it says, if you see your friends getting their haircut, start preparing yours because the haircut is coming for you as well. So I foresee a situation where the oil price will definitely be increasing. The government has said that they have a special fund, a stabilization fund that they want to engage to protect Kenyans. I don't know how far that can go. They mentioned it's about 17 billion shillings. But that amount is not enough.
Clearly.
Yeah, because honestly, if that war goes on for a long time, and as you've said, President Donald Trump tweeted some very heavy things. I think he'd said that Iran must open by Tuesday, today. Otherwise, I don't know what will happen. So I don't know by the time we finish this podcast whether there's going to be developments around that.
Yeah.
But if this war becomes more prolonged, then we see a situation where the prices will go up. And now the ripple effects of that, it's a whole different conversation.
I want to have that different conversation, but I'm seeing Andrew look at me like there's something he wants to say.
Well, the fact is that if you look at the countries that are being most affected by the cutoff in oil, they're also the same countries that supply China Square, for example. So everything on the shelves in China Square, it just came onto this market with a boom about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the products, if it says made in India, the prices there are going to go up.
Okay.
Here. Okay. In other words, so there'll be a direct effect on the fact that we don't really produce everything we should. We keep backing away from local production, even though we had a fairly interesting manufacturing sector until the lifting of exchange controls in the mid-90s. Under import substitution, where we were making parts for cars to put into the vehicles we were assembling. There were tires from Firestone, which was American and then Japanese, and then also the General Tire Factory in Tanzania. Yeah. And notionally, with the East African community, we should be getting tires from Tanzania, but we don't. We import tires and the like from India, which is it's not a quality issue at all anymore, but it's a price issue. And if these countries are having all their oil supplies cut off, so that you have, for example, in the Philippines and Malaysia, workers being sent home one day a week. Their prices people are on strike in the Philippines because the cost of fuel has gone up, so transport has been affected. The air conditioning, the use of electricity has been affected big time. In our country, we have on the bills from Kenya Power an adjustment for inflation. Well, guess what? If the inflation comes from the Southeast Asia or from Asia, it'll come here and we'll see it on our bills from Kenya Power and lighting. So whether you buy tokens, which reflect the costs and all of the taxes, or you are on postpaid, so you can get a huge bill every month. In that, when you read that bill, adjustment for inflation, if something happens to our currency, which has been unnaturally strong for the last 2 years.
Unnaturally.
Well, it went from 160, heading towards 200, down to 129. And nobody can explain exactly what that's about, economist Prince.
Prince is going to explain that later.
So, but it's, and that has caused, and so when you look at just the price of goods in the supermarkets, because we are in a globalized economy. When you see that, and when you see that the supermarkets, for example, the Chandaranas that have been expanding to include here, a lot of their shelves go empty.
And going back to Prince, because this is the same conversation Prince wanted to have. Is this going to happen immediately, or am I the same way?
It's happening.
I love what Andrew said, that I'm paying for the sins of the 90s now in 2026. So whatever is happening with oil today, am I going to start seeing the ripple effects now? And if I am, what else should I expect?
So it's
and
happening.
In how long?
It's happening. So most guys have been looking at this war from the import side, Kenya importing oil. Oil is our largest import.
Okay.
And so most guys have been thinking about it from, we can't import oil.
Okay.
But what about the exports that we had been exporting to the Gulf region?
Okay.
Right now in Mombasa port, there's about 8 million kilograms of tea that's just lying around in a warehouse. The ships have stopped going, and so that tea has been staying there. The people the buyers who had paid for this tea are now even cancelling some of the future arrangements, and so you're seeing some of that tea stay there. I think there's East African Tea Exporters Association that have said the losses from that are about $1 million a week. That's well over a B, right? Well over $1 billion shillings. So I know Kenyans were a bit agitated with the recent oil scandal where apparently the country lost, I don't know whether it was 2 billion in that, but you can imagine for the tea, it's 1 billion a week.
Damn.
Going on.
Damn.
That's just tea. Let's talk about livestock, right? So a country like Saudi Arabia imports a lot of our meat products. And right now, all those licensed slaughterhouses are running at zero capacity, right? Almost zero capacity because the meat is not going out. In fact, for the Eid celebration where we usually ship a lot, that didn't happen this time round. And so we're seeing that trader in Northeastern, in Marsabit, is seeing farm gate prices of the animals go down, right? That lady in Nyeri who is a tea farmer is going to start suffering because of a war that she did not start. Mm-hmm. She cannot stop, and she has no leverage over the players. And generally for a small open economy like Kenya, you said I should explain economic terms. So a small open economy is an economy that is participating in the global trade architecture, but it is insignificant enough to affect the prices, the interest rates, or the financial model. So Kenya happens to be one of those. So in a war like this, we are simply kind of like collateral damage, unfortunately, because we don't really have much. We can't sit at the table where this war is being decided.
So we're on the menu. If you're not at the table,
we're on the menu. Well, kind of. And then we're also in a weird position, right? Because as you see, the government has taken a neutral stance. Said, we just want the war to stop. We want peace. Some people may have counter opinion, but that can work for a while because you see, Kenya, on the one hand, we have a lot of military cooperation with the US. On the other hand, Iran is a big trading partner in terms of they take a lot of tea from us. Mm. We have a huge diaspora in the Gulf region, Saudi Arabia. And so Kenya does not really want to choose sides. And I guess that can work for the short term if the war is short-lived and the winner is ambiguous. But if this war prolongs and the winner is not ambiguous anymore, then if Kenya will not align itself properly, then we stand to lose. Because if you as a country, if a small country stays very ambiguous in a war involving huge partners, you might not end up with any new friends, but you might end up with more enemies. Yeah, so it's a very fragile state for the country. And obviously, we saw the war start when 28th of February. It's been a month plus. So I think if the policymakers, the leaders, the governments, the institutions need to start looking at this, okay, what are we looking at into the future? What are we forecasting to happen? Not just waiting for that information to come, but trying to actively move and position ourselves ready for the aftermath.
And what is the aftermath?
Well, you see, that's an interesting point. I just also should point out, it seems that our flour export, our flour industry is dependent on shipping to Dubai and all over the Gulf. No longer to Amsterdam for the European market. And obviously that any gaps in the export market there have been taken up from Zimbabwe and elsewhere. There is competition that's not affected necessarily, although they will be affected by increases in airfares or the cost of flying. But that's something else. You see, we're not able now to ship 90% of our flowers to the Gulf.
So tea, livestock,
well, I'm talking about flowers now, and apparently the flower farms, which are major employers and huge operations, you can see them. You know, when someone is giving you an aerial view of the road from Naivasha to Nairobi, and you see all the greenhouses there, you realize how big, how incredible that industry has become. Much different than the 1980s and into the 90s when we were all friends with the owners and the kids. And, you know. I think the thing is, those markets don't just necessarily recover. What was not anticipated, unfortunately, by the Trump regime was that the government in Tehran would start attacking everybody. Anybody who has a U.S. base, anybody who's viewed as friendly to the United States. Bahrain, which caused the United States Navy to hurriedly evacuate the headquarters of our Fifth Fleet, which had been there for 40 years, a pro-Western country, a human rights abuser, but nevertheless, the point really is that the government, the Islamic Republic, they upped the ante right away and started attacking everybody. Not just the ships not going through the Straits of Hormuz, which then caused disruptions in global. They have caused disruptions in business and industry in India, in Southeast Asia. They're going after countries that are not anywhere close to the center of operations, that are not necessarily even involved with the United States' efforts towards Iran. If you look, for example, and then the fact that the Iranians sent missiles and didn't get to hit Diego Garcia, but everyone says, well, where's Diego Garcia? Well, it's out there in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And then I'll repeat again that last week, the Kenyan government was entertaining senior U.S. military officials from CENTCOM about how Kenya will assist in policing the Indian Ocean with the U.S., that our cooperation can only get stronger. And this general was talking about the reality, which is that Kenya has been cooperating with the United States militarily for 30, 40 years. This has been going on forever. When Smith Hempstone was the ambassador here, there were freedom fighters or anti-Gaddafi Libyan fighters who were actually being kept at camps in northeast Kenya, being repatriated elsewhere. And Smith Hempstone happened to mention that. And meanwhile, we had the Grand Regency, we had the Libyan investment companies operating here, but we were also giving refuge to anti-Gaddafi fighters who had transited through Chad. And that's when Smith Hempstone was the former Marine Smith Hempstone, who was the ambassador here, who was very instrumental on introducing multi-party democracy and getting freedom fighters here out of the country, away from the torture cells.
Do you think Trump will say what he said he's going to say on the tweet? Will he bomb the bridges and the nuclear plants today?
I think he wants to. I think he would like to. I think that there should be enough senior officers who simply will not answer the telephone when being ordered to commit illegal acts. There are laws of warfare. There are things you're not supposed to do that the International Criminal Court is supposed to be able to try you or charge you. Let's face it, Vladimir Putin has a warrant out for his arrest from the ICC over stealing children from Ukraine. That was the main issue, was how the Russians are taking Ukrainian children, taking them back into Russia and indoctrinating them. And so Vladimir Putin, the head, the leader of the world's second most powerful country, or third most powerful country, has an ICC warrant out for him, for his arrest. So, the United States, which unfortunately never signed up to the ICC, that doesn't mean that your president can't be indicted and charged. And I would hope that it is possible to indict people like Trump and Hegseth for war crimes. Because what we're doing now is, first of all, we're waging a war of choice without any objective that you can see. We're not trying to roll back communism. We're not trying to preserve keep the dominoes from falling in Southeast Asia, which is our rationale for being in Vietnam. We're not defending South Korea from the northern communists who invaded South Korea in 1950, and then the Chinese attacked in aid of the North Korean communists. So we're not doing that either. We're not, in fact, providing military assistance as we did to Israel in 73, 74, or even before that, but lots of military equipment to preserve Israel as a country. This is a war of choice. They don't see it this way, but this is a war of choice for Israel as well. Now, Iran has been very vociferous in how they want to destroy Israel, but that doesn't mean we have to go to war on behalf of Israel. And this is a real problem. And that has everything to do with domestic politics in America, where the Israeli lobby is exceptionally strong. And I happen to be a nice Jewish boy from New York, so I'm very aware of the crimes of Zionism in 1948 and even before that. I'm also very much aware of how Israel has been threatened.
Yeah.
But it seems that since 1980, the invasion of Lebanon and the occupation of southern Lebanon,
You should write a book. I think
there was that now, if we're talking 40 years later. Is Israel threatened? Yes, they're threatened, but is it an existential threat? If you can blow up 3,000 Hezbollah activists through their pagers, I would suggest you're not really under that much of a threat. And if you can just kill 70,000 Palestinians, yes, you lost a horrific number of your own people, but does that justify killing 60 or 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza? And the support given by the U.S. government has put us in trouble around the world and among many influential circles. And now Trump's war of choice is threatening to disrupt NATO. The guarantor of peace in Western Europe since the end of World War II. The guarantor that Germany would not be rearming, because that's one of the main reasons for NATO, was that most of the European countries had such bad experiences with Germany in World War I and then World War II that they didn't want to see a powerful German army. Well, now Germany is rearming. I'm not saying that there will be a rise of Hitler or in Western Europe, but what I'm saying is one of the main reasons for NATO existing as a defensive alliance was also to maintain a reason for Germany never to have an army again, a powerful army, because they're good at that.
Interesting.
But now Trump is talking about getting out of NATO. And yet, because we've been carrying them, he says we've been carrying them, we've been paying for them, and they're not helping us. The one time we needed assistance, because we were attacked after the World Trade Center was attacked, NATO stepped up and joined in the United States' efforts and war in Afghanistan.
And every time you say we, you're talking about America or Kenya?
I'm talking about America, but you see also Kenya.
Oh, well, here you're sitting, you identify as an American.
And I'm talking about Trump. I didn't
you
vote
kept
for him.
saying we. So I just want to be clear.
But we in Kenya are also at risk.
And that's what I want us to really talk about.
We are at risk because if you look at the reason given after the Dusit Hotel was attacked by al-Shabaab, it was because the United States had moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And Al-Qaeda, and al-Shabaab is an affiliate, a franchise of Al-Qaeda, commissioned al-Shabaab to go after a U.S. target in Kenya. So can you imagine eating lunch at the Hidden Garden restaurant in the Riverside Drive complex down the road from here, and you get blown up and shot up by al-Shabaab terrorists because the United States moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So it does have ripple effects.
Okay.
This is me speaking from living in Kenya, our public association with U.S. military operations, our maintenance of troops in Somalia, even sending police to Haiti at the behest of the United States, because we didn't want to send our boys to die there. The truth is that Kenya, are well identified with the United States. We Even when the head of state goes to China and makes very, very strong statements about how China is our friend.
Prince, what can I do based on all these threats of bombing, threats of me being blown up, threats of oil has gone up? Like, we know food will go up. Farmers will struggle. That means probably we're going to have an issue with food supply. If we can't even bring in fertilizer, we'll have a food issue. So what can Ivy do? What can that farmer in Yeri do, the farmer that you mentioned? What can someone sitting in university right now about to start their studies do? What is the relevance and what can they do? And also, talk to me about Lamu, because there's no way that it's all doom and gloom. We know, like right now, Lamu is set to be one of the, I think, most lucrative ports based on what's going on with the war. So could you just also give me some hope? Yeah, what can I do? And give me some hope.
I'll talk about the Cape of Good Hope.
Yeah.
Hope is not
hilarious.
a method.
So
it's not a strategy.
The reason Lamu has become relevant right now is because, you see, the Strait of Hormuz, there's no other way around it. It's not like, let's say, the Strait of Malacca, where some ships can kind of maneuver through, The Strait of Hormuz is, if it's blocked, it's blocked. So what are the ships doing? They're going round Africa, come to the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, and then Lamu happens to be on the way, right?
Okay.
This, I would say, is a flow, not exactly a stock.
Okay.
What do I mean? It's an opportunity that exists as long as the war is there. If this war were to end 3 weeks from now, then these ships would go back to the Strait of Hormuz. So I would not necessarily look at Lamu and say, this is Kenya's next big break. I don't want to discount the opportunity either, because, suddenly this maritime trade route has gotten an opportunity, and Kenya has been establishing itself as a relatively stable country in an otherwise conflicted region. In East Africa, we happen to kind of stand out like that. If I was a policymaker and I saw Cabinet Secretary Mbadi saying the government is already trying to re-strategize on how the Lamu thing can work better, definitely needs a bit of better infrastructure. The port still does not have the most up-to-date infrastructure to handle some of those ships docking and transshipping there. But beyond that, because maybe the infrastructure doesn't happen overnight, is to use this opportunity to really establish good relationships. So those companies, those shipping lines that are coming through Lamu, they should really be given a proper treatment, high quality service, so much so that they think, I think this place looks like an option, and also I know that some of these shipping lines have been experiencing very high war risk premiums. Every container on the ship has an insurance premium that is paid for. So because of the war risk premiums have gone up. And I know that if, let's say, the costs of transrouting towards this side might justify the lower insurance risk premiums that they might pay, then they might consider this route. But as I mentioned, Lamu's relevance lasts as long as the war lasts.
Interesting.
For now, right? So I wouldn't put all my eggs in the basket there. Then to your other question, what do you do?
Yeah.
As an individual?
Yeah.
Right now it's really kind of tricky because Kenya's economy was actually on a very good trajectory before this war happened. Central Bank had given a 5.5 GDP growth rate projection. IMF had given 4.9, slightly lower. Our own analysis at eConsult through our Kenya Economic Outlook, we gave it at 5.2. We had seen private sector credit start to go up. Banks had started to give some loans to the people. We had also seen CBK do the largest quantitative easing cycle in its history. They reduced rate cuts. They reduced rates for 10 consecutive times, something they've never done before. So things were looking a bit good. And now suddenly a huge external shock comes and it forces us to re-strategize. And, I don't want to be like a prophet of doom, but I'll have to say it's bad. Because you imagine that ship that has transrouted through the Cape of Good Hope. That means extra travel days. It means they're paying higher staff wages. They're also paying more oil to just transport. So the transport costs themselves go up. The shipping line processes this as a surcharge. Then the importer is passed on that cost. They pass it on to the wholesaler. They pass it on to the retailer. So you're there in Carrefour or Naivas or in your local spot and prices have gone up. And unlike other taxes that are direct, no one is going to tell you this is a 50 bob surcharge because of the Strait of Hormuz manenos, right? So definitely people should expect prices will go up. And there we're just talking about transport costs because of increased logistical costs. We haven't talked about transport costs because of the fuel itself going up, like, fuel being a factor of production. Yeah. So we haven't talked about that. We haven't talked about prices going up because of currency devaluation.
I was actually going to ask you, does this affect currency?
It should in theory. But Kenya's shilling, and I don't want to be really quoted, it's a little questionable how stable it is. And I think even the IMF has kind of, I think last year, expressed concerns that they suspect it may be a managed currency. Because in economics, we have something called the impossible trinity. And if you have a free-floating exchange rate, an open market, you would expect that the Kenya shilling should be moving by market forces of demand and supply. But it's been right there, 129, 130 for 16 months. What is happening with it? I don't know. I'd love to sit in some of those conversations and closed rooms. But, is it a bad thing for the country? No, it's a good thing that the currency isn't fluctuating as much, but it's a risky affair when you're dealing with open economies. So I don't know whether the months of import cover that we now have, which have been historically high, I don't know whether that will change with this current situation with the war. But I would say, what should a young random Kenyan do? Definitely now is a time to save a bit more. If you're used
you guys are always telling us to save. Now is the time to travel. You could die tomorrow. There's a war. Travel, spend your money, buy that car. Live your life.
How will you travel and the Dubai airport and then some of
and
these
even
airports?
prices of air tickets obviously are also going up.
I saw the ticket to New York.
Actually, everything that is being that you would recommend, common sense wise, about what counting your shillings, watching your budget, eliminating spending on items that you don't need necessarily, has an effect on the economy, because it means your consumption is going down.
Yeah.
One reason why our import cover, the Kenyans, import cover kept going up is because of the lack of economic activity. People not buying as much, not consuming as much. Another thing that we don't pay attention to is where do we get our liquid natural gas? And if that there was a facility, I think in Qatar, that was rocketed, from Iran, that's going to take 4 to 5 years to come back online. See, a lot of the damage that's been done to infrastructure in the Gulf states, through the Iranian spreading the joy, spreading the war, a lot of that infrastructure will take years to get back online. Not only just lots of money, but also just time and expertise, which means that we may see an increase in the price of gas, natural gas here, which will then have an impact on our forests as more wood is consumed for cooking. Okay, so it's no longer. These are ripple effects that this war is having that we've never seen.
Yeah.
In a war that's of this. First of all, I question, why would we call this a war? Of course we call it a war because people are dying, people are firing at each other, but it has spread so rapidly away from the main parties. The effects, the consequences, which have all been incurred almost through ignorance or disdain on the part of Washington. Absolute disdain. Almost as if you've got a toddler running things, and you don't feel you can control them. So I think, and I don't want to be a harbinger of doom, but I feel fairly hopeless about what can I do to stretch my dollars, my shillings, and seriously, and this because
so then you travel, you go,
just disappear,
disappear, enjoy your life. Andrew's saying he's hopeless. That is actually quite.
I think when you look at some of the good things, the fact that Lamu port, the facilities there, which should have been all online by now, and Lamu, which is after all the end of Lapset, but there is no oil from southern Sudan. So a lot of the things that should have been in Lamu that for Lapset just have never been built, for whatever reason, and we're never told why not. Instead, what we do is we extend membership in the moribund East African community to South Sudan, to DRC, to Somalia. We need more failed states in the East African community. And so when you have a government that is pushing this sort of thing, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, Ivy, friends, apparently the government in Mogadishu, the federal government of Somalia, besides winning a battle in Baidoa against one of its own autonomous states, not against al-Shabaab, but against the governor in Baidoa, the federal troops have taken over Baidoa. They signed an agreement with Turkey for oil exploration. And on this coming Friday, a Turkish ship will show up somewhere in Somali waters to start drilling for oil. My question is that the area that Kenya has claimed? Notionally, that Kenya did not win at the ICJ, whereas Somalia's claim was found to be valid, and Kenya's claim to that offshore oil in 2016 was not valid. And my suggestions on Radio France and on radio and the like in 2016, 2017, you're right, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, which is that Kenya, which is not at war like Somalia, and has the technical abilities that a joint condominium to exploit that whole area to develop it for oil, fisheries, and the like, because the government of Somalia has no capability to exploit it. We do. We have expertise in our government and in our private sector, but we still claim that an area, and even after we lose at the International Court of Justice, there's no indication that anyone wants to make a deal, as Trump might say, with the government of Somalia to get this thing up and running. So you see, the port in Lamu could be very important if we were exploiting the maritime resources that we share with Somalia. But that's not going to happen. That hasn't happened. And will it happen with so much else going on in the world? I don't believe so.
Prince, you were saying,
yes,
save money. But aren't we going broke?
Yeah.
Would this make us go broke if this goes on? Because you said we're not even able to export. You're not even able to afford to import. It'll take forever. And if we're going broke as a country, I don't have money to save. I'm not even making it. I don't have money to save or to invest. I don't even know if I'm asking a question or if I'm just, regurgitating what Andrew is saying. Now you're making me hopeless.
No. Don't be hopeless. Do not. Economies are resilient, and Kenya happens to be an emerging economy. So it means we still have a lot of potential to achieve what this nation can be, right? For example, one of the things we have is a very youthful population, right?
Who rely on digital.
Yes.
And even that is being affected by
yes
the war because of the issue with is it the semiconductor sector?
If I was a policymaker, if I was the president of this country today, one of the things that I would focus on doing is doing some structural changes in our energy infrastructure. So, for example, diversifying our energy suppliers. We do appreciate that sometimes when the government gets into a G2G government contract, there may be some economies of scale around such a deal. But if you look at a country like India, India has 40 different oil suppliers. 40. And about 70% of their oil now passes through alternative routes, not just through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
So I would say Kenya also needs to try and see whether we can reduce the supply concentration risk, because right now it comes exclusively from the Gulf.
But it won't happen anytime soon. Okay.
It's
Even if the decision was made today,
Yes.
how long would that take? And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is, so I'm not in control of what the president can do, but
Right.
I'm in control of me. So even as an investor, for example, should I be looking at oil as a commodity right now? Is that, or is it too late because we already know about it? Like, where can I also be
I
putting
mean,
my money?
obviously, if you got into an oil position on 28th of February when the war started, or we're avoiding the word war, when the conflict started, the Brent crude prices were about $68,
And now we're at?
111. So almost double. We're almost doubling. So yeah, if you took a position in that, you could have benefited.
I think you still can though. Cause,
Yeah.
So what else can I invest in?
Um,
What else should I be looking at now? Should I be putting my shares in companies that supply war drones?
I mean, I also would supply.
Drones for war. No?
I mean, it depends on how ethical
where
an
are you
investor
investing?
you are.
Yeah, but where are you putting? What money are you investing? Are you investing in Nairobi Securities Exchange? Are you?
No, this is a
investing in
global conflict. And won't we also see the NSC also completely
We saw it, 200 million shillings
Lost.
within 3 weeks or something.
because of the war?
Just
with all the-
investor sentiments when the trust levels are low, and people also want to hold on a little closely to their money. So, and a huge portion of our investors in the NSC are foreigners.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, right now we have the ZD trader.
Yeah.
I'm still yet to see how much of an impact it could have, because it had so many people trade, but still, if you take the monetary value,
Yeah,
it was
it's-
much smaller.
Exactly.
So, yeah, a lot of the NSE blue chips shed a lot of value. And so, in terms of companies, I would expect to see some of these green energy. For example, I know the Strait of Hormuz has revealed to many countries, hey, guys, we are relying so much on fossil fuels, right? Maybe in the future we need to change our model. Kenya happens to be at least one of the best countries in terms of renewable energy. Over 90% of our electricity grid is geothermal or wind. So we're doing very well on the electricity side. But on the transport side, that's where we are really relying on these fossil fuels and the manufacturing. So if we were, let's say, to see a more shift towards electric vehicles, I've seen some electric motorcycles really becoming popular, one brand called Spyro and a few others. So if the government is to make more investments on that front, then that might be a good stock to hold. Will it pay off right now? No. Because you see, an electric vehicle could cost 3 times as much as the regular vehicle that runs on petroleum, right? So there's a lot of push because of this climate change movement telling developing countries like Africa, hey, you guys need to stop using this kind of vehicles and jump to electric and pay 3 times more what the person in the US had to pay. And they use that. I mean, the US really use the oil to run their economy and propel themselves. But right now, you're telling a person in Kenya who could have bought a car, no, wait, 3x more period of time before you can afford a car. So how do you also increase your human production capacity? It's a little tricky.
Well, I think that what individuals can do is start waking up to reality. Instead of living on hope, and putting in mind and asking questions of the private sector and of the government about what the heck has been going on here for the last 15 or 20 years. Because if you look at the NSE index, the main index, I think it crossed 5,000 in 1995 or 96. Where is the index today? We should have young Andrew from Kenya Wall Street here, but he would tell us, I think it's about 2,800.
I think it's 2,000 something. But
Yeah.
I don't have the...
It passed 5,000. But when the government lifted exchange controls completely, it just in 1994, It spurred tremendous amounts of growth here. Almost all of the housing estates you see, Riverside Park and the like, were pent-up housing demand, which was released by lifting exchange controls. The very significant black market that existed until that point, all through the 70s, and from the late 70s after the coffee boom ended, and through the 80s, just disappeared. So that made doing everything 20 to 30% cheaper because the premium that you paid to get money to buy dollars outside the central bank disappeared. In other words, many things happened. As I was saying to Prince, also the government reduced corporate tax and individual tax then in 92, 90 to 94 from 60% down to 30%.
So what should I do now?
Well, that's a good. You should demand. I mean, I don't know if people are not reading newspapers. I don't think, but I think demand answers from the private sector also. What has happened? Demand answers from KAM, the Kenya Alliance Association of Manufacturers. You keep talking about how manufacturing here was 20% of the GDP 10 years ago, and now it's 11%. What have you been doing? You had one of your former chief executives as the minister, as a CS in the government. Did she do anything different? Was anything done? Why is it like this? In other words, instead of just excluding people like me from CNBC Africa because you can't get some of the corporate giants to show up on the same panel with me, let's get down to brass tacks and say, what is the private sector in this country doing to actually preserve its market? Instead of getting EGSs and EBSs and golden hearts, why don't our captains of industry stand up and speak out about how difficult it is to do business here? It is difficult. The uncertainty of the laws doesn't make anything any easier. And this is even just not even going into the whole impunity situation, where you have impunity where people don't do their jobs because there is no payback. And then everyone's looking for a backhander. But that has nothing to do with Trump's war. Trump's war is an opportunity for people in Kenya, for the middle class to wake up and start speaking out. Because you're right. China now, I think one of every 2 cars sold is electric. They have really jumped into that, but that means you need an infrastructure, which the United States does not have. That's one of because we don't, Trump, we don't really believe in electric cars. We believe in big engines and pickup trucks. And because we are notionally energy self-sufficient, the petroleum exporting countries, OPEC, was actually originally set up by the U.S. oil and British majors in the 50s and 60s to control the price of a barrel of oil. And by 1972, then 73, 74, a barrel of oil in the United States that we were producing from Texas or elsewhere it was like $5.60 a barrel. We were paying the OPEC countries $1.50 a barrel. And then when the oil shocks began, mainly because of political reasons, Israel in the Yom Kippur War, that's when Saudi Arabia and the other countries said, wait, we don't have to take $1.50. They also basically nationalized all their oil.
Okay.
So they basically, they kept the oil majors, the Exxons, the Caltexes, and, they kept them as the marketing agents. They kept them for processing for their expertise as they developed their own, and their marketing services. But they then set the price. And then also it didn't hurt that our arms industry was able to sell weapons to places like Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. But now, if you look at gold, for example, gold is $4,900 an ounce. It
dipped recently, but it's coming back.
But
up.
when I was investing,
I
was investing in a gold mutual fund for a long time, way back when. What I learned from that is how difficult it was to get out when you're sitting, which is not the case now because of digital trading. I mean, I had to get on the phone. I had to use a fax machine sometimes. But I also what I learned, and this is a lesson that people should be aware of, is don't get involved in investments that are dependent on politics or political policy or political reasons.
That's a very good one. Please
Because-
emphasize that to the camera.
And
Don't
that's
get involved.
Don't
Say
get
that again.
involved in investments that are dependent on politics or political favors, or even when there's a scarcity, so a company has a lock on the market, but if that company is somehow mixed up with with politicians, don't get involved. The mutual fund that I was investing in, which was in U.S. magazines, is top performing. It was the gold fund. Then I didn't pay attention to how close they were with the government in Pretoria. In other words, that they needed the government in Pretoria not to be subject to sanctions because of apartheid. So that they were lobbying in the United States, doing what individuals can do and should do in their countries, but lobbying for certain policies that benefited their pockets, which in that case was, no, you do not cut off trade with South Africa, regardless of apartheid, because look at the gold investments. And South Africa is the major source of gold. And if you want to buy gold, you're going to go to the Soviet Union?
Yeah.
So, now that was something that made sense to me from their point of view. It didn't really make sense to me from a long-term perspective.
So going back to thinking as at now, because I also just want to have Prince add on, because he also said, look at commodities. Right now, if you're watching this, you're a budding investor or whatever. Avoid political heavy investments. Look at commodities like gold. Prince, please comment, because you're going to say a comment on that before we wrap up.
Well, we're just discussing that. You see, when the economy is unstable and the sentiment is poor, the expectations are low, gold becomes a safe haven. And we've seen that time and time again through the oil crisis, through the financial crisis, through even the last few months. Gold sort of looks like, if you don't want to be in the stock markets, because you see the stock markets, they represent companies. And most of these companies are one way or another affected by oil and fuel prices. Then gold seems to be one of those places where you can run to for the short term. And luckily, there's a lot of financial infrastructure around how to invest in gold. Unlike when you mentioned back in the day, a lot of red tape around financial markets. So I think that would be one thing that I would recommend someone to look at. But I also, and don't mean to be the prophet of doom, but this is a time to, quote unquote, almost survive. A very small proportion of the population will have disposable income to now invest in secondary financial markets or other things. Most people are struggling to put food on the table, because even when we look at inflation numbers from the central bank, I think food inflation was about 7%, close to 10%, right? Which means the poorest 40% of the population the poorest proportion of the population who spend about 40% of their income on food are already being hit. And this was before the oil crisis. So I suspect that when we see the Bureau of Statistics and the central bank release the inflation numbers, we may see food inflation go up to close to 10%. So it just means this is a time to be very smart about how you spend your money. I said save, and I also know aggregate demand in the economy is low. So then if people then also don't spend, then things become bad.
Yeah.
It's a pervasive cycle where, you can tell people to save, yes, but then that means money is not exchanging hands, and then we sort of dig ourselves in a deeper hole.
Should I be growing my own food?
Should you be growing your own food?
Should I start considering making sure that I support my farms or whatever?
I mean, if you are importing if you're importing a lot of your stuff from, let's say, Europe or China, we're expecting to see a lot of these shipping costs go up, if not already.
So also buy local.
If you can buy local,
yeah.
And if you are also a business person, try to take advantage of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Okay.
Kenya should not just be supplying meat to the Gulf.
Okay.
You can supply meat to Nigeria or tea to South Africa or other places, where I want to see African markets also really leveraging this African Continental Free Trade Agreement, because, as Andrew said, those may be less subject to some of this geopolitics.
Okay.
So if we reduce our concentration risk from some of these places that we've been primarily exporting to and try to look internally to Africa, then I think we have a chance of making the situation a little better and also just hedging ourselves as an economy.
All right, you know what time it is. It's time for the Just Money Hotline. You call, we listen, and together we unpack your real life questions. Business, money, career, or culture. Let's see who's on the line. All right, and we have a question from the audience. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for texting this in. Emmanuel asks, in the event this war prolongs, what are some of the things that we might not truly consider as ordinary citizens that would happen to us? What would this mean? So, yeah, let's hear what Andrew has to say about that.
The longer this conflict goes on, and the more it spreads, and there's more spreading of violence and war to Yemen and elsewhere with Iran's proxies, the more problems, more costs we will incur here for enhanced security. That and also as people will have to get used, should get used to much more stringent security preparations and activities, whether it's going into malls, going into clubs, any place that has lots and lots of people is a potential target, especially because it's not just going after American targets. It's not just in Kenya. It's not just going after Israeli targets. Because I'll repeat my contention, which is that the government may say we're neutral, but it acts in a certain way. And you can talk about that we're neutral, we are not on anybody's side, then why do you entertain a general from Europe whose U.S. Central Command is conducting the war against Iran? Why are you, maintaining troops in here and there? Why are you, and the security situation we know is fraught in this country on the periphery in northern Kenya. We still have banditry. We still have problems. We've had Somali National Army troops or Jubilant security forces cross the border and sit in Mandera. And that was in the news for a little bit of time, and it just disappeared without anyone saying, oh, by the way, they went back across the border. Did they? And nobody asking the question, what were the KDF garrison in Mandera doing when the Jubilant security forces had crossed the border, followed by the Somali National Army? Let's not forget that now, I think, when Governor Robo was governor, he was tweeting pictures of technicals in the streets of Mandera fighting between the Jubilant forces and the federal government forces. It was not Al-Shabaab. It was our allies who were across the border, armed, fighting in the streets of Mandera. Therefore, and we have these little pinprick attacks anyway. Last week, a KDF trooper on guard duty shot a camel at night last week outside a camp where a KDF platoon is guarding a Chinese construction site. But that's because you have KDF deployed domestically because of the genuine threat of Al-Shabaab all through northeast Kenya. So in other words, that situation can only get worse the longer the conflict goes on with Iran, Israel, the United States, and then the Houthis in Yemen. It can only get worse. And I think we need to get a handle on what we're doing here to ramp up security preparations. And that has a cost.
Of course.
It has a cost in doing business. It has a cost in people not showing up at your to buy because they're turned off by being searched. These are all costs. And then there is this notion where the tourist industry will say, but it gives the wrong perception. Aren't we an island of relative security, as you said? Yeah, the perception. But is it true? Yeah, the perception is okay, but the tourist industry does not want to see this sort of thing. But we need to. So in other words, and at the same time as we have diminishing government services, it seems, the question is, do we have that ability to expand our security preparations? Is the private sector ready? And are the people ready? Because nobody's talking about what the threats are. I think that's why we're here. Is because people are not talking about the actual threats, because people don't join the dots and don't seem to feel that there's a problem when you say, I'm neutral, but oh, by the way, hey, General, come here. We'll help you. We'll help you police the Indian Ocean. Oh, you guys up in Iran, don't worry about it. It's not about you. See, this is all wrong.
Yeah.
This is just all wrong on so many levels.
Yeah.
Again, I'd remind you that if there's a Turkish ship drilling off of Somalia, is that Kenyan water? And what will Kenya do to our ally in the EAC, the federal government of Somalia? There's so much confusion and I realize it's very difficult for anyone for the middle class Kenyans to see how does this affect me?
Yeah.
But I would also say, without trying to sound too clever by half, you mentioned electric vehicles. Well, basically what you're doing is saying to Kenyans, wait 8 years. Because after 8 years, there will be used cars coming from electric vehicles coming from Japan, Korea, and China. Right-hand drive vehicles, used, and they come in after 8 years, at a much lower duty, right? Because what are we driving here? We drive other people's cars that they've given up for whatever reason. And that by allowing all the reconditioned vehicles to come in the late 1990s, we destroyed our own assembly factories. We did. I know I sound like a madman. There's a car here that was called the Uhuru. It was assembled here. It's a German Aska. It was assembled here at General Motors. It was 100,000 shillings, $10,000, 5-speed transmission, cassette player, air conditioning, power windows.
You mean $1,000?
No, 10,000.
So $1 million shillings.
Then 1980,
Yeah.
and then
Are you hearing?
the registration plate was KW, because you used to be able to tell the year, the age of a car by the registration of it. KW, KX, KRR, my rust bucket Subaru that I bought from Ian Douglas Hamilton. Anyway, the truth is that we had the skills. I haven't been to the industrial area for some time, but if you drive, the last time I went through there, I could see signs of companies that closed down, auto ancillaries, this battery company, this wiring company.
Mobius.
They were all
such a nice car.
Such a nice car.
Yeah, very good design.
They were, and then of course, and then the only thing I see in the newspapers occasionally is somebody talking about the Nyayo Pioneer, which was a horror story, and I think they still had the wreckage at the Kenya Railways headquarters, because that's where Pneumatics Kenya was, that parastatal that was going to develop a homegrown car, But no, I'm serious as a heart attack now. We had an assembly industry here. I ordered a Jeep Cherokee. I ordered one that was off the lot at General Motors. And then because of a contract dispute, when I came back to the country after home leave, the courts had put them aside. But this was a genuine Jeep Cherokee, air-conditioned, big vehicle, similar to the vehicles that USAID would ship, except these were right-hand drive instead of left-hand. And they weren't covered in dirt sitting outside Kenyatta National Hospital or any place else they were donated to. But these were built from the ground up at General Motors. We ended up buying an Isuzu because that's General Motors' joint venture with Isuzu in Japan, so we qualified. But we were doing these things. Now it's considered a big deal if there's a couple of hundred Volkswagens assembled in Thika at KVM. And unlike Uganda, Kenya doesn't even manufacture or assemble its own armored vehicles.
We're regressing.
Well, we just don't do things.
Oh.
It's like we have the facility and we don't do things.
Actually, when you look at Kenya's growth model, usually economies are supposed to transcend from agriculture to manufacturing to services.
Okay.
Kenya sort of jumped from agriculture to the service industry. So our manufacturing sector, as you'd mentioned earlier, is virtually dying or very much stagnated than should be at this level of economic growth. And you see, manufacturing is a good employer. It gives, more people jobs than the service industry.
Yeah.
And it also gives them formal jobs because then you are put on a pension and, there's some tax that gets formalized there. So which is why you're seeing so much of our economy is informal, huge informal economy. So that's one of the things that I think I just wanted to point out as you were mentioning that, we're not doing too well on that front.
Even if the war was to stop today,
Yes.
don't expect that things will be good tomorrow.
Even if the war in Iran was to stop 3 weeks from now, the war has a very long tail. And in economics, there's a term called hysteresis, which in simple terms, it just means that the system's current state is very much influenced by the past events, that even if those events have changed now, the system hasn't fully adjusted. So we're still sort of paying for some of the mistakes. Because you see, we are still going to have so many suppliers who may have been burnt by this war, and they'll have put premiums on their costs. We're still going to see a situation where, if let's say, as you pointed out, that if Iran is not happy with our stance on the war, and they have a G2G government contract with us, that G2G government contract almost implies some level of cooperation, some level of geopolitical partnership. So if they're not happy with the way Kenya conducts itself, then they are in a position to kind of treat Kenya as a not so important trade partner. So if there is a shortage of oil, Kenya is not going to get prioritization. If there needs to be price cushioning, Kenya might not get that kind of cushioning. And so we might see a situation where even if you see the war ends, some of these ripple effects might be here to stay. And, some countries have a special arrangement with big oil producers. So, one thing, US does not get a lot of its oil from Hormuz. It gets a lot of its oil from Canada and Mexico. Hormuz supplies oil to, as we mentioned, Asia, China, India, Japan, and, now Kenya. Some countries that get a lot of their oil, let's say now from, US or Canada, US getting oil from Canada, they have special G2G arrangements where they have a special reserve, a special fund where we're like, if we're getting oil from you, we know we are protected to a certain degree. Kenya does not have any such arrangements with some of its oil partners. So we need to see a situation where going forward, the government should negotiate better. But for you to do that, then you may not be neutral for a very long time. You may have to diplomatically decide on what makes most strategic sense to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I started off by saying that I'm really tired of living in unprecedented times. And the thing with war, maybe we've not really spoken about this here. Some of the effects that we really haven't spoken about are loss of life, leading to mental issues, leading to systemic poverty. We see ourselves going back to a time where even as Kenyans, as Africans, we just a low mood generally. You said even the environment will be impacted. Like the thing is, whatever is going on now, even if you feel the effects even 10 years from now, they're terrible. When we speak of hopelessness, hopelessness is big. It's bigger than what you consider, because you need hope for people to wake up and work. And that is what war in essence does. And I'm getting tired, and this episode has made me a little bit sad. But I hope it's educated you. Thank you so much if you've reached the end of this episode. Please remember, we are found on the Kenyan Wall Street YouTube page. Hit the subscribe button. I want to thank you for 42,000 subscribers. Wow. This arguably is one of the fastest growing financial business life podcasts on the internet today. So I want to say thank you so much. Leave me a comment. If you have questions for Andrew, if you have questions for Prince, leave me a comment. I don't know if you find Andrew. Maybe where can people find you? Because you're impossible to find, because everywhere he goes, he gets banned for the comments that he makes. He gets invited to places and he's not invited back. So if I'm going to get a call from the government after this, I'll let you know so that I can never see you again.
Thank you very much.
Where can we find you, Andrew?
You can find me on Facebook.
Okay.
And eventually I used to be on LinkedIn, but then my accounts were disabled.
Who is this guy? Who is this guy?
And also Twitter.
So we'll find you on Facebook, the OG platform.
Facebook, yes, for old people. Yes,
Fine.
that's right.
So find Andrew on Facebook. Prince, where do we find you?
come to my website, come to www.econsult.africa. Go to the forecast arena, take a position. There's a question there on oil prices. I really want to see what Kenyans have to say, and we see whether their predictions come true. So that's why it's at. Luckily, my LinkedIn account has not been banned. So you can also find me at Prince Muraguri on LinkedIn, and as well as all other platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Prince Muraguri.
Good. This is the first person I've ever heard being banned on LinkedIn. Can you imagine how bad you have to
he's
be
linked out.
banned on Instagram?
But also, but Twitter was the one that attracted the attention of the FBI from the U.S. Embassy and the anti-terror police unit.
Okay.
About, did I have any actionable intelligence on a potential attack on Lavington Mall? I merely said on Twitter and Facebook that I would not be, this is in 2020, or 2021 rather, that I would not be going to Lavington Mall after 7 p.m. from January 15th to February 3rd.
So
I
then,
would not be patronizing any of the establishments because security is a real problem.
damn.
And it's the least secure mall in my area.
Damn.
And that I noticed on Twitter before I kind of was exited that people were then forwarding my tweets to NIS, to police, to
You're famous.
to everybody.
Good. Very good.
But fortunately,
Yeah.
I knew the head of NIS.
So anyway, that's why you're here, surviving. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Until next time, linked out.
Thank you.